Welcome to Owner Insight's Women in Construction series. I am Steve Harper. I'm the CEO of Owner Insight, and this is by far one of my favorite series that we do. Why? Because it gives us an opportunity to highlight women that we are working with that are doing amazing, amazing things out there in the construction world. There is so many different disciplines. There's so many opportunities the construction field offers, and we want to do this series to highlight it for women that are maybe thinking about a career shift or starting that first effort in their career journey. And I want them to consider how many opportunities are available to them in the construction field. And one of the ways that we want to do that is by highlighting amazing people that are doing amazing work in the construction industry. Today is no exception. Our guest is Emily Stout. She's with the state of New Mexico. She oversees projects for all of their state parks, and she's an amazing leader. And I'm so excited that she agreed to do this and can't wait to dive into this interview. So let's get started. Emily, welcome to our Women in Construction series. How are you doing today?
Doing fine, Steve. How are you?
I am good. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. So thank you for agreeing to do it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I've been looking forward to it too. I'm always
Awesome. Well,
excited to talk about what I do.
yeah. Well, you should be the expert in it, right? But one of the things that we're trying to do with this series is we're actually trying to get this out to as wide an audience as we can so that when women are thinking about maybe a career shift or considering maybe, that first job, that construction and all of the different disciplines within construction might be, something that they should consider. And the industry is shifting and changing so much that we're wanting to highlight as many great people doing great work like yourself. And so we're so excited to have you on the series.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, um, it's such a wonderful field to be in. And so I do want to encourage women. It's still fairly limited in a lot of ways and for understandable reasons. But as much as I can help expose people to different avenues that they can get into the field, that I think that's really, really important.
Well, so let's start with your career path. Like, what led you down this? You're an architect, so you kind of knew in school kind of what you wanted to do and where you wanted to go. But give us just a little sense of kind of how your career path has kind of unfolded.
Sure. So I am a licensed architect. However, my career path didn't actually unfold that directly and lineally. I didn't know from an early age, like most of us, that I wanted to be an architect and go to school and just go through the schooling and the licensing and get into the field. Um, I actually um, I actually did like to make things from a very young age. And I knew that I liked to do that. When I went to get my bachelor's degree, I actually got a degree in fine art. Um,
Oh,
and so I started my career doing exhibit work. So
okay.
I specialized in sculpture and I worked for firms, both nonprofit and for-profit firms that did work with museums and interpretive centers, and also worked for a commercial company that did trade show booths and point of purchase displays, that type of stuff. And so that actually got me into the being in production.
Okay.
That really exposed me to actually working in construction in a way. I stood behind a table saw, and I did laminate, and I worked with all the tools, and I really really loved that work. One thing that I think that is limiting for women in construction and for everybody really is that it is hard on your body, and
Yeah.
tools are made for really big people and have big hands and are really strong, and I am not that person. I mean, I'm a fairly small person, and after a while of working in that, and also just working in construction, the construction materials,
Sure.
my body really started to wear down from
Yeah.
that. And I think that really is a big consideration for the construction field as a whole. It's kind of, there's the dirty jobs. Construction definitely falls within
Yeah.
that. And it's understandable. It's very hard on your body and can be very wearing over time. So I did that for 11 years. Well, I
Oh,
worked.
wow. That's a long time. That's a
Yeah,
really
I
long time.
actually worked production for 7 years, and then I got into the design side. So I used my background, my art background, and worked in design, and that actually took me into the digital realm. I had been working in the real realm, and now I'm in the digital realm. And so I worked as an exhibit designer for a couple of years for a
Okay.
museum in southern New Mexico, and then I really decided that I wanted to take it to a larger scale. That I really enjoyed it a lot, but exhibit work can be limiting because it's not you're usually working within a very confined space.
Yeah.
Um, and so then I went back to architecture school and I got my master's degree in architecture, and that was 15 years ago now. And I've been working in the architectural field since then. And I've mostly worked in public work. I have done a little tiny bit of residential and a little tiny bit of commercial, small commercial. But most of the work that I have done is been in residential, and that largely was because when I came out of architecture school was in 2008, and the housing market crashed,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so there wasn't, the architects weren't doing that. And so that's somewhat, just like all of us, there's a lot of external factors that shape what we do. And so that was a pretty huge influence, but I'm really thankful in a lot of ways because that I really enjoy what I do and I really enjoy working in the public work realm because it does actually tie back into the exhibit work that I was doing,
Yeah.
working with museums and nonprofits. Have worked with a lot of governmental organizations now, also education. But I worked on the private side for a long time. I did 8 years with private firms who did public work. And currently I work for New Mexico State Parks, and I'm a project manager with them. So now I'm on the owner side as opposed to being on the consultant side.
What would you say is the best thing about the career path you've chosen, in your opinion?
Um, Boy, that's not an easy question.
I told you, like, there wouldn't be any gotcha questions, but maybe there might be.
Well, I think at the very beginning you were you were talking about getting into the career path and being very.
Sure.
And I was saying how it's not been very lineal. I tend to think about my career as being much more like a river, and so it's kind of flows, and then it hits these eddies, and then it's a rock or something that kind of changes path, and it goes. And so there's been a lot of influence through that process, that I think has probably been the most rewarding part of it. Is I, when you think about going into a certain field, or at least for me, I think when you think about going into a certain field, you have a certain concept of like, oh, I'm going to be designing buildings,
Yeah.
and it's not really that. Architecture is not. I mean, it is, but especially in the the fields that I have worked in have been so varied
Yeah.
that the exposure that I have and the types of opportunities that I have had to learn new things and learn about things that I would never probably even think that when I was younger think that I would ever have exposure to.
Yeah.
I think that really has been the most rewarding thing, and now I'm to a point in my career that I get to look back and I can see how that experience is helping to shape how I want to move forward with my career.
I love that. Well, the thing that I've found with several of the women that we have interviewed for this series is everybody kind of went in with sort of that, like you said, kind of one set of expectations, but then based on experience or the project exposure or maybe lack of resources, you end up having to take on more responsibilities. You actually get your finger in a lot of different pies just sort of by the nature of these projects. Every project's uniquely different. Every project team is uniquely different, and every situation, it's not a rinse and repeat kind of situation, which seems to have a lot of folks inspired that they get to take their formal education, but then it really expand upon it because the necessity of having to be flexible is, is a tantamount to this industry, I think.
You're absolutely right.
Well, so when you look at this, if someone were coming to you, maybe a young person that's like, I haven't actually considered, construction as a viable career path, and they're thinking about it. What would you want them to know about why this really is such a really good industry to look for or look towards?
I think that it really points back to what we were just talking about, that there's so much variety in this field. And so don't have an expectation of thinking that if you want to go into construction, that just means that you have to go to a job site and pick up a hammer or pick up a nail gun and really be doing that all day. I mean, I think that's great. And I think if you want to do that, and I think that there's actually that part of construction is very exciting right now because I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of opportunity for AI. I think it's one of the areas where AI actually could do some good for
Yeah.
us because I think that construction, kind of interestingly enough, has it I think I heard an architect say one time, it has moved, the field has moved at a glacial speed.
Mm.
And that is absolutely true. And it's not like medicine or the aerospace
Right.
industry where they've really kind of taken on the technology and moved it ahead. And so I think that if you are really interested in actually how the product goes together, there's so much opportunity in that right now because I think there's a lot of opportunity for how that can change. But also remember, there's so many other parts to construction. I mean, um, there is the concept piece like,
Yeah.
hey, we want to do something, and so there's people that have to come in and do, and that is actually a big part of what I do right now. I started it at the product end, but now it's kind of like, oh, we have an idea, and it's figuring out how do you get the funding,
Yeah.
how do you find the experts that can help us figure out how to do this, and then how can you get it implemented. So there's this whole concept and analysis and planning phase that is very much part of the construction field. And then there's always, there's the design side. If you're really interested in architecture, really interested in engineering, and that just working in that area is there's so much that you get to learn, and if that's what you really enjoy, then I think there's huge opportunity for that, and women especially have made huge strides in both of those fields, and so I think that being in that area is very welcoming for women.
When
Um,
when you got into the space, was there what give us maybe a little sense of how you sort of it sounds like you were on the work product side for a long time, and then when you made the shift, when you did make the shift and you were kind of going down this different avenue for the industry, did you did you seek out mentorship? Did you sign up for any particular associations? Were there any folks that kind of you sought out that could help kind of guide and direct you during those early days to kind of help you figure out how to get your feet under you?
um, I will say that I have been incredibly fortunate in my entire career path to work for people that have really helped to mentor me.
That's awesome.
Starting way back when I was doing exhibit work. That very first job that I had, because, when you have a degree in fine art, which my parents were a little skeptical about, um, but I got this job, and that group that I worked with just was incredibly supportive. And it really introduced me to a lot more skills and a lot more confidence in this field. And throughout my entire career, everywhere that I've worked, that has been true. And what
That's great.
happened with when I made the shift was that I was working for a commercial exhibit company, and we were talking about technology in the industry. Well, they bought a CNC machine, and they
Ooh,
needed somebody to program it. Yeah, and I raised my hand and I said, sure. I actually had been taking a CAD class at that
uh-huh.
time. I was kind of contemplating, what the next step would be. Just mostly just wanting career expansion, professional development, and so they allowed me to do that.
That's
And
great.
so that was really kind of that first step into it. I did, after that point, applied for an internship with a company or a nonprofit organization in New York. And that actually took me, that internship was specifically for exhibit planning and design. And so that gave me the opportunity to really experience and delve into the digital realm. And the planning piece of it. So, and from there, really, I did that for a few years. And as I mentioned, that was when I decided I wanted to just wanted larger scale. So I chose to go back to architecture school at that point. So I do agree with you. I think it's really important to, you don't, like I said, I was really fortunate because the people that I've worked with have been super supportive and great mentors and really encouraged me throughout my career. But if you don't have that, I do encourage you to reach out to different organizations that are involved in the field. And there's so many different organizations out there. They're on a very large scale. There's AIA
Yeah.
for people that are in design fields. There's also home builders associations. There's green building associations. There's just all sorts of different organizations that you can get involved with that I think will help you shape and figure out what it is the path that you want to take.
I love that. One thing that I took away from what you shared at the onset was that you don't get what you don't ask for, right? So at the end of the day, raising your hand and saying, "I'll take over." And just for our audience, those that don't know what a CNC machine is, could you explain that just really briefly?
Yes. So, and you're you're going to ask me exactly what the acronym stands for,
No,
and
we're a non-acronym explanation kind of show.
and I can't tell you, it's computer something. But
Yeah.
anyway, it's a way to digitize production of construction materials.
Yeah.
And so you actually program what you want to do. We were actually doing signage. That was largely what we were producing on it because we were a commercial exhibit company. So it was signage that we would put on our trade show booths, or we actually did some signage for an office building. And so we would program it into the computer, and then it's a large machine, flatbed machine, and it actually will take that information and can carve out whatever you're programming it to do
Yeah.
to do, telling it to do. My family actually works in manufacturing, and so they actually use it to create components for different types of machinery. Same concept.
So when you raised your hand, you kind of came at it with a little bit of knowledge and experience already, probably.
I did. I mean, I knew what it was, and I knew the direction that the field was going.
Yeah.
That we really need to, as a field, push it more towards just push it forward in
Yeah.
general, because, like I said, it's just I go into buildings sometimes. Actually, I had this project that and we were looking, I was working with the architect in southern New Mexico, and we were looking for facility for school to move into. And it was this monastery,
Wow.
not a monastery, I'm sorry, it was a nunnery. So, and
Okay.
they actually had lived there, and it was built in the 1800s, was one of the potential places that we were looking at. So anyway, they had this fairly large space below the building, a crawl space that you could actually stand up in. And we went down under there to look at, because we were looking at, structurally
Sure.
how it was, could it actually support a bunch of children running around? These were like middle school age students, and looking at how that joist structure was built, it's exactly the same as a number of
That's
projects.
awesome.
It's like 2x8, 16 on center. You've got your edge. It was on a concrete foundation, I'm sure, and so that when I talk about kind of the pace of the field, and that's my reference point really, is kind of like there's so much opportunity now, and really it's bringing in that technology, and now technology. I mean, when I was doing this with CNCs, that was in the 90s, 1990s, and now there's so much more available.
Well, you with your, with that technology experience, your willingness to, step up and say, "Hey, I'll do that." That obviously opens up a lot of opportunities. One of the common pieces of advice that I've heard from other guests that we've had on this particular series is that when everybody else backs away, that's the time to lean in and say, "I'll try it," because that opportunity gives you not only opportunity to learn and have new experiences, which only further your career path, but it also shows a willingness of being one of the first people that the project team can count on. What would you suggest for someone that's coming into the field to how to differentiate themselves as they're coming in and they're kind of new, right? Don't shy away from necessarily the volunteering or doing the hard work, but step into that. And any other advice that you might give that could be beneficial there?
Um, I would just say don't be afraid.
I
I
love that.
mean, I think that it is hard, and for women, it's even more intimidating for
Yeah,
sure. Um, and I think it's important for women to be confident in wanting to try things and not being afraid to put it out, because you're going to be in a room or on a job site, and it's all men.
yeah,
Even today,
yeah,
and I go out, and as you know, I'm the owner representative, project manager, but I have a number of job sites, and I show up to these meetings, and it's all men and me,
yeah.
and which is fine. I mean, I think that is it. It's all about the relationship that you build, and but it is important to make sure that you feel confident in that and not afraid to put things out there. I mean, I think that's good advice for anybody going into any field. And when you're young, it's hard, I know, to to know how to do that and not get discouraged. Um, but I do think it's important.
Yeah, one of our most recent guests gave a piece of advice that you over prepare and you outwork them, right? And you show that you're there. It is the industry has shifted quite a bit, right? In terms of the hopefully the if for all for the positive that men are not as challenging to work with because the industry has kind of woken up and recognizes that there has to be a shift in attitude, that there are more and more women joining the construction space every single day. How do you when you go into a new project team, obviously you're the owner, so there is a certain level of intimidation for the project team anyway because you are in that role, but how do you make sure that you are able to hold that position at the table without falling into or allowing a project team to fall into old habits, I should say, maybe might be the best way. How do you make sure that you show them that you're going to be there, you're competent, but that you're also not going to put up with any of the kind of sexist behavior that still comes into the construction industry in a lot of ways?
I'm glad that you asked this question because it's actually something that I think about a lot. Not just as my role as a woman, but I think in my role of how to move the field forward, and so we don't get caught because behaviors, historical behaviors can be they can kill a project on their own,
Yeah.
no matter
Yeah.
who's at the table. And so that is the vital piece. And with the first thing that I say when we're sitting down to start a project, and depending on what the project is, different team members will come in at different times. But whenever there is a new component to it, I always really stress we're all in this together. And
I love
so
that.
and I think that is really vital for us, just even in our lives, culturally, that it's a system, and we all have to work together, or else it's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And so that takes the focus off of individuals and it puts it back on the project. And that to me, I think is the most vital piece. And whenever things start to break down, fingers start to point, we start to hear the blame, I always just pull back and I say, yeah, we're at this point, there's a problem, we got to figure out what's the solution so that
Yeah.
we can move beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I wish a lot more of even our owners that we work with through Owner Insight really, we're going to use that piece of advice and send it to them because you have to have that, set those expectations because I think um, people operate at the level of expectation that you set for them, right? And when you come into a project team and you say there is only one standard in terms of how we treat one another or how we communicate or even how we celebrate, things that are going well, but also how do we not shy away from things that aren't going so well, but identify those so that we can, avoid a small problem to becoming a big problem. And that comes from communication and being transparent. And I think that's a really critical factor. And in more owners, I wish would have that approach from the very onset, because once you have the guide rails in place, kind of like bowling, right? You can't go in the gutter because everybody knows what the expectation is, and so it's easy to hold yourself accountable, but also everybody else on the project team accountable as well, because everybody's playing from the same hymnal, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is the thing that has you most excited about the future of the industry, specifically for women that are maybe coming into it at this point in their lives?
I think that it really would go back to what I was talking about, how there's so much opportunity in this industry to move forward with technologically. Um, we're seeing it somewhat with 3D printing, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of um, a lot of research at work in that area about how to use technology in all phases of construction. So starting at planning, it's project management software and plan. How do we include the digital realm and how we're trying to figure out how to do these projects? The in the design field for a number of years now. Through the use of computer aided design and 3D modeling, that area has grown profusely, but I still think, there's still opportunity for how AI is going to start to be incorporated into that. And I think actually in the production field, I think there's just huge areas, not only in how we build structures, but also in how us as humans, interact with building that structure. I think that we're going to see more and more where the technology develops, where we're actually programming something to actually do the on-site construction instead of actually being out there and have hands-on labor that's doing it. And I think that's a huge opportunity
Yeah.
for women because that mitigates that issue of size and
Yeah.
just the physical ability to do it. And I also think it's just a huge opportunity for the field in general because I think it can be done in a much healthier way than we've been doing it for the last few hundred years. I mean, really, we've been building for as long as humans have been around, but the Industrial Revolution changed the way that our processes and how we do so much in industry, and so I think that is a huge opportunity moving forward as how technology continues to integrate with that industry.
And so, would you recommend someone that might be considering this as a direction that they want to go, get as much hands-on experience as you possibly can to understand the technology that's out there? I mean, there's all these different avenues for trainings and even sort of try it before you buy it kind of approaches to the careers. I don't know if the state of New Mexico does anything along this lines, but I was curious if you would suggest individuals seek out other people that are doing the type of work that interests them and connect with them on LinkedIn or invite them out for a cup of coffee and learn about the job, the role, what they did to get down their path on their career, or what interests them about this particular vertical within the construction space that they've selected. Do you think that's a good idea to kind of put kind of as many feelers out as you possibly can to get all the different types of opinions and experience that you could, possibly soak in before you actually make a concentrated decision about which way to go?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that now that is one of the advantages of a digital world is that we
Yeah.
can connect so much easier. And I have absolutely reached out to people when I've been doing job searches for sure, but also just if I've had a general interest in a direction that I want to go, or I read an article and look at who the author was or if it was about a specific model of something that I was interested in, just reaching out to that person because I think that really is the only way to that maybe not the only way, but it's a really good way for you to get exposure and
Yep.
figure out if that really is a direction that you want to go. And I think that it can always lead to other opportunities. I mean, um, when I was mid-level in my architecture career, I had reached out to an organization for a job position, and I didn't actually get that particular job that they were advertising for. But I did then reach out to the principal and asked to just have an informational interview, and that was really great because I was mostly wanting to I was changing it was moving out to California and didn't really know a lot about the field and the firms in that area. Who should I contact? What's the working style, and it was so helpful and kind of being able to make those connections. And in the end, I actually did get a job with that firm. So you never
Uh,
know. I think I think that goes back to don't be afraid. Reach out. You never know. You may not hear back from them, but you
yep.
never know what's gonna come out of it.
Well, and even if there isn't a role today, the fact that you do that, actually, I can tell you just as a business leader, just someone having the gumption to reach out at that level to say, hey, I'm not looking for a handout or a hand up. I'm just looking to, kind of pick your brain a little bit, garner some baseline of your experience to maybe help guide me or direct me as I move into my own career path. I think that a lot of people are really, really open to helping. And, what are we the best experts in? Our own, path, our own journey, and what we like about what we do and why we do it. And I think when you can get people to, have those conversations, even if it is just like, hey, just a fact finding informational kind of interview, you will make an impression on that person, and you'll be surprised how that may manifest in opportunities for you down the line. Even if it is just a situation where maybe down the road they become a professional colleague, now you have a resource. And as you're getting into maybe with even with a different company or different organization, you've got someone that you can reach out and get a little bit of mentorship and guidance from.
I think that's a really good point, Stephen. What I do want to add to that is that every time you do that, you're building your experience and you're
Yep.
building your resume and you're building your knowledge. And so you have that to help guide you with how you want to move forward.
Love that. Yes. You are an exceptionally great leader. My entire team loves working with you. And I know that the interactions we've had with your team, you guys seem to have a really close knit structure. And I love that. What makes you a good leader? There's kind of two questions. What makes you a good leader? And then what would you want to impart in terms of wisdom for someone that's maybe just starting to come up that has a little bit of oversight or leadership as part of their job description? What would you recommend them do to make themselves a good leader?
Well, I think in terms of answering the first part of your question about, how my leadership style and what I feel like helps to make me a good leader is I think going back to, I believe this came from Sam Walton, and he was like, it's who you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that that is so vital, to remember that to be a leader, it's not just all about you. and that goes back to
Yeah.
what I said about we're all in this together. So in order to make it work, you have to surround yourself with people, and you have to be able to listen. You have to be able to be open to stuff that maybe you're not too comfortable with, but that you're willing to try and push forward. um, and so I think that and also be transparent about that. So that I think leads into your second piece
Yeah.
is that, that letting your team know, that, we all have to work on this together. We may not all have the answers right away, but we're going to try. And what we want to do is I want all of you to feel comfortable to bring forward concepts and ideas, of what might work, and we'll let's toss it around, see what we want to try, see what will work best. And I think when you're young, it's really important to not be intimidated by that. I mean, you have to. There's a certain level of you got to gauge
Yeah.
what what you can do, and also check your ego and make
Yeah.
sure that you're acting appropriately.
Yeah.
But I think it is important to, if they're asking, put it out there, and don't be afraid to do that, because I think that's the only way that you're going to allow yourself to develop those skills to continue to become a good leader.
I love that. I liked how you set that up about how it works for you, and then ultimately sort of how someone else can kind of shift it for themselves. And I think the fact that you brought up the word ego, I think is a really big thing. Oftentimes everybody thinks about ego because, kind of your power or, power hungry, or your type A personality, and you're sort of control, kind of a control freak in a lot of ways. But ego actually works in both ways, right? It's both, kind of the bad side of power, but also sometimes people, their ego actually holds them back from actually asking and leaning in and saying, "Hey, I need to know more about that." But I think when it comes to leaders, especially if you've never gotten any formal leadership training, your job is to make the people that work with you, not for you, but with you, better every single day. And that's true for people that might be within your own organization, but also extends out to all of the other people that might touch that project. And there's many of them, right? Some project teams may have a handful of people. Some may have hundreds of people that are on there. And how you set that tone, and ultimately how you go about leading, when you get your ego out of the way and you say, what can I do, as the leader to make this, this team better? How do I, contribute on a daily basis rather than just dictate what they do, and, how to kind of lead from behind the desk, but getting out from behind and actually having those conversations. Cause I think good leadership it's a contact sport, right? It's very much one of those things that you have to set the tone, because if you don't set the tone, the culture of the team, if and it'll set itself, and oftentimes that's not a good thing.
Yes, yes. And you do have to be careful
That's
about that. And I think that you bring up a good point is that, teams are varied. And
yeah,
so, I mean, you have your direct team that you're working with, and there's a certain level of control and how you work together. But you have to remember when you're in this field, you've got the client that you're working with. You have the architects, engineer, the AE professionals that you're working with. You have vendors that you're working with. You have user groups that you're working with, and knowing how to navigate all of those different situations. Is really something that you do have to develop, and you can't expect that one way of working with a certain group is going to work for all of those.
right. You have to be adaptable. But you have to, you also have to know, I think, from a leadership perspective, where are your strengths, and then what are your weaknesses, and how does your team augment those weaknesses? And I think that's one of the critical things that I always tell young leaders that I get an opportunity to work with. It's leadership isn't just all of a sudden a hat you're wearing and there you are, right? It
Yeah.
is a constant evolution of getting better, and you never stop. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, but especially in construction, because you will move from one project team to another. There will be different personality types. There will be people that we get along with really good. There will be other people that drop the ball, and we've got to kind of coax them along, and we got to bring them up to our standard of performance. And then sometimes there's just this, they've never been on a team that's actually gelled, right? So leader really has a huge opportunity to say, hey, look, whatever your bad experience was on your last project isn't going to be the same experience that you have on this one, because we are going to do it different. And I think part of that is, being confident enough in your skills and your abilities to say, I don't have all the answers. Like you said, I loved your advice early on. We're all in this together. So we all want the output to be the result, right? We can get there, one of three ways, and one through the painful door, one through the, not so painful, but didn't enjoy it, or one that we all were super glad we were all working together and can't wait for the next project to work together again.
Right. And you're almost like at the end of that project, you feel kind of like family.
Yeah. Yeah.
You show up and you know a little bit about each other, and you really want to have that where you feel like you're all really integrated into it. I think one other point I might add about being a leader is also, as a leader, you have to be afraid not to fail.
Yes.
And to let yourself learn from
Yeah.
that, because you are. We're human. We're all human, and things are going to go wrong. But I think the most important part of that, just like we would expect from anybody on our project teams, is that we ourselves do that and
Yeah.
say, "Oh, okay, what happened there?" Have a little introspection about it and try to figure out maybe better ways to move forward.
Yeah, I love that too, especially. And I think for leaders, I think that's always a really important, especially from an owner perspective too. The more engaged they become, those things, the failures don't happen with as much regularity, because there's a more, strong or strengthening commitment by the project team that everybody operates and knows what everybody else is doing. So there's accountability and transparency, and the owner's driving the process. But even if things don't go well, like you said, taking a step back and saying, I'm not going to, have that sit in my, shame hall of fame, right? I'm going to learn from what didn't work. We're going to make sure that we learn from that experience so we don't repeat, the history in the next project, or, in the next phase of the project. And we're going to benefit from, what didn't go right, so that we can make the adjustments along the way to get it right the next time.
Yeah, that is so
Yeah.
valuable.
I love it. Well, Emily, I could talk to you literally all day, because I love your approach and your just your enthusiasm about what you do and why you do it, I think is infectious. But let me just wrap up with a few real quick questions. If you had to give one piece of advice for someone that is in the construction space, moving kind of down that corporate ladder, um, what would you suggest to women out there that are already down the construction path as to how to, maybe accelerate their growth?
I, I think that most important piece is kind of what we have already discussed is that, really one thing is step back and, is this what I want to be doing? And am I going on the right path? And if you are, that's great. Continue to reach out and seek out those resources that can help you continue to move in that direction that you want to move. The other is if you're not, then try to seek out those resources that you can. And don't always think that it may be in a completely different realm. So let yourself be open to opportunity that's happening throughout the world, because there might be something there that will take you. You can still be in the construction field, but it will inspire you to kind of look at it in a different way, and take you on a different path that's maybe something that you enjoy more or something that you really want to do. What I what I'm thinking of is I was actually reading this article about the logging industry, and it was about this. It's software engineers, and they're developing this technology that is they're automated machines that you can just send out into the forest, and they can determine what needs to be culled. It's not
Wow.
a cutting machine, but it's remotely controlled, so there is connection to a human somewhere. But to me,
Fascinating.
I was talking about how I feel like there's a lot of area for growth in the actual production side of construction, and that really made me think, wow, that's really could be a huge opportunity for
Sure.
how we do construction, especially because construction can be in some kind of really unforgiving places. Like it may be hard to get in there, or it's in a really tight city lot, and or it's just in a faraway place. It's halfway across the world, and so how do we think about doing this in a different way? And that really came to me. I mean, it is a construction related industry, but really kind of just being open to some other thoughts and some other concepts of how people are doing things. And I think that will allow someone, especially if you're a woman and you feel like you're kind of, you feel restricted
Yeah.
by the way that the field is currently operating. Um, you can create your own way to get into this industry, and also let you become who you want to be.
I love that. I love that. If because you do look at things through a different lens today as the owner, and you have a wide variety of projects that you work on, if you had one piece of advice that you could give to other owners, maybe that's other state departments, that are managing construction, not just in New Mexico, but around the country, or other municipalities, or just owners in general that, oftentimes feel a little bit powerless because they don't realize where or how engaged or involved they should be in the process. Do you have any advice for those owners about why it's so critical and important for them to stay involved and continue to be present in those meetings as the project is progressing?
Well, there's a couple thoughts on that. One of them goes back to what you were talking about in how the projects progress. It is so critical for the owner to be involved with what's going on, because as the owner, you know what the ultimate outcome needs to be. and you're the person that can best convey that.
Yeah.
And so I some I've had these projects with different consultants and contractors, and they're where I've really reviewed plans, or I've gone through their cost estimate, and they're like, wow, we never get this much attention from the owner. and and I'm really kind of struck by that, because
Yeah.
I'm like, that is so critical to
Yes.
making sure that what we were talking about. We have the school that is this end product, and if we're not engaged and we don't know what's going on, you're absolutely not going to get that end product that you
Yeah.
expect. And it may not be at a cost that you expect, or on a timeline that you expect. And so it's really important. I know sometimes with owners, I feel this, where they want to hire the experts and step back. But I do feel like it's really, really important for the owners to still be engaged. And the other thing I would say, that, just from my experience, and this is really what I really continue to work on, and would like to see us as an agency do, is just really seek out that opportunity for growth and
Yeah.
change. I, Working for a governmental organization, there are a lot of constraints, and it is there. There are the cliches, but it's really, really true, and aspects of that are really good. I mean, I know there are reasons for policies and the statutes and how we operate. But I do think that it is important, to be able to let ourselves see outside the box, and then figure out how we can knit it back in to um, what is possible, so that you're not limiting yourself, because it that's just growth in general. That's just growth in general of humans, and
Yeah.
I think that we can't expect it. Who else is going to do it if it's not going to be the owners that are leading that
Yeah.
change?
Well, and we've seen it too, right? We've actually had instances where, owners have just abdicated control. And like you said, the project will not turn out the way you expect it. And it'll likely come in at a much higher cost, because owners don't think about, even though you might actually have a contract, there are other ways that these stakeholders, which are profit motivated, by the way, they're trying to figure out how to get more of your dollars that are in your pocket into their pocket. And that's always a challenge, right? And if you're
Mhm.
not paying attention or minding the store, it can be a recipe for disaster. The other side is that, like you said, get that reaction you got from that project team, like you don't normally get that kind of attention, or they don't get that kind of attention. I think that's kind of sad, because it's so important. There are a lot of things that technology is great, but sometimes there's a lot of rinse and repeat that happens. And if you don't catch those things in design reviews, you could be spending money on things that you shouldn't be spending. We had a school district in Texas, actually, that fortunately they have a really, really talented individual that's overseeing the projects, but they had used the same firm for a long time. And there were things built into these schools that were just starting to break ground, for things like a book room, that nobody uses books in, K through 12 education anymore, right? They don't need that storage. And so it was nearly, $800,000. And on top of that, then FF&E that tied to that, because now you had secure book carts, and you had this, locking mechanism within the book room itself. And they go back and look at these schools that they built maybe within 2 years, and nobody caught that those facilities have those book rooms, and they become these large empty storage lockers for teachers' personal belongings. Well, that's not a good use of space, right? So there's other ways that you can leverage it, and compromising one area of a build because you've already built in these other costs in other areas. When you do the design reviews, well, you can now maybe shift that to what you really want and need, but you only get there by having that hands-on approach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So, well, Emily, this has been so great. The last question I just want to ask you is would you be open if there's someone out there that's considering this as a career path and they may just want to pick your brain or ask you some questions about your experience, or maybe they have some challenges that they're going through and they're trying to navigate, do I stick in this industry? Would you would Is there a particular way you might be open to having people contact you? Is it through LinkedIn or email, or and no pressure, by the way, if you're like, hey, I don't want to talk to anybody, that's totally I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but
No.
I think always, it's always good to have people that are out there that are willing, willing to hear and listen to what other people are dealing with, or field questions that maybe they're too afraid to ask other people.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, I think that it's super important for people to reach out and
Yeah.
make the connections, and learn as much as you can. And so I'm certainly happy to talk to anybody that wants to reach out to me. I do have to admit that I'm not super great about social media, but I am on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Um, and so anybody that wants to reach me through that platform can. I'm I believe it is just my name,
It
Isabel.
is.
Yeah.
We'll put a link in the show notes, but I didn't want to do it without asking you first. So
Okay.
I'd
um,
be like, man,
and
I did Steve a solid, and look at this. I get like people calling me, and I don't even know. I don't have time for this.
yeah, so I think that's actually probably the best way to
Okay.
reach me. And I actually have been trying to be more active on that platform, just because I do think I think actually that platform in terms of professional development is a great place to connect.
Uh, well, fantastic. Well, Emily, thank you so much for being a part of this. We are so grateful for you doing this. And, we'll be back again with another episode of Women in Construction very soon. But I encourage you to check out Emily and her LinkedIn. We'll have that listed in the show notes. And once again, Emily, thanks for the time. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. This has been fun, Steve. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.